The macabre history of the Bexleys. They hid 6 kids in a room under a cemetery. The ancient Restwood Cemetery in the hills of Vermont had been serving the community of Millbrook for over 2 centuries. Its weathered granite headstones and twisted oak trees bearing silent witness to generations of the town's history. When groundskeeper Tommy Mitchell noticed a section of earth beginning to sink near the cemetery's oldest section on a gray October morning in 2024, he assumed it was simply the natural settling that occasionally occurred in old burial grounds. What he discovered when the ground finally collapsed would expose one of the most disturbing family secrets ever hidden beneath American soil. The sinkhole that opened near the cemetery's 1800s section revealed something that defied explanation: a concrete ceiling with what appeared to be artificial lighting visible through the crack in the earth. Mitchell's initial assumption that he had discovered an old burial vault or maintenance tunnel was quickly dispelled when he heard sounds coming from below. Voices, movement, and what sounded unmistakably like children crying for help. Emergency. Responders who arrived at the scene faced a situation unlike anything in their experience. The collapsed earth had revealed the roof of an underground chamber that appeared to have been constructed decades earlier. The chamber was equipped with ventilation systems, electrical connections, and what appeared to be living quarters designed for human habitation. Most disturbing of all, the voices coming from within were clearly those of children who seemed terrified by the sudden exposure to daylight and outside voices. When rescue teams finally gained access to the underground chamber, they found 6 children ranging in age from 7 to 19 years old. The children's initial reaction was not relief but terror. They covered their eyes from the unfamiliar brightness of flashlights, spoke in whispers as if afraid of being overheard, and begged the rescuers not to take them away from what they called their sacred sanctuary beneath the guardians. The underground chamber was a sophisticated construction that had obviously been planned and built over an extended period. The space measured approximately 20 by 30 feet and was divided into separate sleeping areas, a common living space, and what appeared to be a makeshift classroom. The walls were lined with religious artwork depicting death, resurrection, and what appeared to be scenes of children living peacefully among the deceased. Investigation into the chamber's construction revealed that it had been built directly beneath a cluster of 19th century graves, with the concrete ceiling serving as the foundation for the headstones above. The engineering required to construct such a space without disturbing the existing graves suggested sophisticated planning and considerable financial resources. More disturbing was the realization that whoever had built this underground prison had deliberately chosen to hide it beneath a cemetery, using the sacred nature of the burial ground to discourage investigation. The 6 children found in the chamber exhibited signs of long-term isolation and systematic psychological manipulation. They spoke primarily in religious phrases and biblical quotations, demonstrated an obsessive preoccupation with death and the afterlife, and showed profound fear of the outside world. Medical examination revealed severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and developmental delays consistent with spending years in an underground environment with limited social interaction. The children's accounts of their imprisonment, pieced together through careful interviews, revealed that they had been taught to believe they were special guardian children, chosen to protect the souls of the dead buried above them. They had been told that the cemetery was a sacred space where they served as intermediaries between the living and the dead, and that leaving their underground sanctuary would result in spiritual catastrophe for both themselves and the souls they were meant to protect. Investigation into property records revealed that the cemetery had been managed by the Bexley family for over 40 years. Harold and Ruth Bexley had taken over maintenance of the historic cemetery in 1982, presenting themselves as devout caretakers who wanted to preserve the sacred nature of the burial ground. The family lived in a modest house adjacent to the cemetery and had been respected members of the community, known for their dedication to maintaining the graves and their extensive Knowledge of local history. When police arrived at the Bexley residence to question the family about the underground chamber, they found Harold and Ruth Bexley in their living room, both dead from apparent suicide. Beside their bodies was a lengthy confession letter explaining their actions and their twisted justification for imprisoning children beneath the cemetery. The letter revealed a couple who had gradually descended into obsessive grief and religious extremism following the death of their own child in 1980. The Bexleys' confession detailed how their son's death had driven them to develop an elaborate belief system centered on the idea that children needed to be protected from the corruption of the modern world by being placed under the spiritual protection of the dead. They had convinced themselves that by raising children in the cemetery's underground chamber, they were preserving their innocence and ensuring their eventual reunion with deceased souls in the afterlife. The confession also revealed how the Bexleys had acquired their victims over the years. They had specifically targeted children from troubled families, runaways, and orphans who were unlikely to be missed or whose disappearances could be easily explained. Using their position as cemetery caretakers and their reputation as compassionate community members, they had gained access to vulnerable children and gradually convinced them that living underground was necessary for their spiritual protection. The underground chamber contained evidence of the elaborate indoctrination process the Bexleys had used to maintain control over their captives. Educational materials focused exclusively on death, burial practices, and religious concepts related to the afterlife. The children had been taught to read using only religious texts and had been given no information about the outside world beyond warnings about its spiritual dangers. The chamber also revealed the daily routines that had governed the children's lives for years. They had been required to spend hours each day in meditation and prayer for the souls buried above them, to maintain the chamber's cleanliness as if it were a sacred temple, and to participate in elaborate rituals designed to reinforce their role as guardians of the dead. Any questioning of these practices or expression of desire to leave the chamber had been met with intensive re-education about their sacred duties. Medical examination of the rescued children revealed the devastating physical toll of their underground imprisonment. Years without natural sunlight had caused severe vitamin D deficiency and bone development problems. Limited nutrition and lack of proper medical care had stunted their growth and left them vulnerable to various health problems that would require extensive treatment to correct. The psychological evaluation of the children was equally disturbing. Years of isolation and religious indoctrination had left them with profound trauma and distorted perceptions of reality. They had been taught to fear the living world above ground and to view their underground chamber as the only safe space in existence. Many initially refused to believe that their imprisonment was wrong, or that the Bexleys had been harming them rather than protecting them. The investigation revealed that the Bexley operation had been active for over 2 decades, with evidence suggesting that other children had been held in the chamber over the years, but had either died in captivity or been moved to unknown locations. The chamber contained personal belongings and writings from previous occupants, painting a heartbreaking picture of children who had lived and died in the darkness beneath the cemetery. As investigators worked to understand the full scope of the Bexley crimes, they discovered that the couple had been in contact with other individuals who shared their obsessive beliefs about death and child protection. Correspondence found in their home suggested that they had been part of a loose network of extremists who believed that children needed to be removed from modern society and raised in environments focused on death and spiritual preparation. As Chapter 1 concluded, the 6 rescued children were beginning the long process of medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation. Their emergence from the underground chamber marked the end of years of imprisonment beneath the dead, but it was only the beginning of an even longer journey toward understanding the outside world and reclaiming their stolen childhoods. The cemetery that had concealed their suffering now stood as evidence of how grief and religious extremism could corrupt even the most sacred spaces. Rehabilitation of the 6 children rescued from beneath Restwood Cemetery proved to be one of the most complex psychological challenges ever undertaken by Vermont's Child Protective Services. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in religious trauma brought in from Boston, described the children as existing in a psychological state that blended severe isolation trauma with deep religious conditioning that had convinced them they were spiritually bound to the cemetery and the dead buried above their former prison. Oldest child, a 19-year-old young woman who eventually chose the name Hope, became the key to understanding the Bexley family's operation and the sophisticated psychological control system they had created. Hope had been imprisoned since she was 8 years old and had essentially grown up believing that her entire purpose in life was to serve as a guardian for the souls of the dead. Her worldview was so fundamentally shaped by this belief that she initially refused to leave the vicinity of the cemetery, convinced that abandoning her post would result in spiritual catastrophe. Hope's testimony revealed the intricate daily routines that had governed life in the underground chamber. Each day began with what the Bexleys called communion with the guardians, a ritual where the children would recite prayers for specific graves above them while touching the concrete ceiling that separated them from the burial ground. The children had been taught the names and histories of everyone buried in the cemetery and were required to incorporate these deceased individuals into their daily prayers and meditations. The psychological manipulation employed by the Bexleys was particularly sophisticated for individuals with no formal training in psychology or religious indoctrination. They had created an elaborate mythology around the children's imprisonment, complete with detailed explanations for why they had been chosen for their sacred role, and what would happen to both the living and the dead if they failed in their duties. The children had been taught that they possessed special spiritual gifts that allowed them to communicate with the dead and provide comfort to souls who were struggling to find peace in the afterlife. They believed that their suffering and isolation were necessary sacrifices that enabled them to serve as bridges between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. This belief system had been reinforced through elaborate ceremonies and rituals that made the children feel important and necessary despite their imprisonment. Investigation into the underground chamber's construction revealed that the Bexleys had spent years planning and building their subterranean prison. They had used their position as cemetery caretakers to conduct the excavation and construction work during off hours when they were unlikely to be observed. The project had required considerable engineering skill and financial resources, suggesting that the couple had been planning their operation for years. Before acquiring their first victims, the chamber had been designed with multiple layers of psychological control built into its very architecture. The concrete ceiling was decorated with names and dates from the graves above, constantly reminding the children of their supposed connection to the dead. The ventilation system had been configured to carry sounds from the cemetery above, including occasional funeral services and visits by mourners, which the Bexleys had told the children were communications from the spirit world. The discovery of detailed records kept by the Bexleys revealed the systematic nature of their operation and their complete belief in their own justifications for imprisoning children. They had documented each child's spiritual progress, their responses to various indoctrination techniques, and their effectiveness in what the couple believed were genuine communications with the dead. The records showed parents who viewed their victims as religious artifacts rather than human beings with their own needs and rights. The legal aftermath of the Bexley case was complicated by the couple's suicide, which prevented traditional prosecution and closure for the victims and community. However, the investigation led to charges against several individuals who had assisted the Bexleys' operation, including suppliers who had provided materials for the underground chamber and religious extremists who had encouraged the couple's beliefs through correspondence and visits. The medical treatment of the 6 survivors required innovative approaches to address health problems that were virtually unknown in modern pediatric medicine. Years of vitamin D deficiency had caused severe bone development issues, while limited nutrition and lack of proper medical care had created various health complications. The constant psychological stress of their confined environment had also manifested in numerous physical symptoms that required both medical and therapeutic intervention. The children's adaptation to the outside world was further complicated by their profound attachment to the cemetery and their belief that they were abandoning their sacred duties by leaving. Several of the children experienced severe anxiety attacks when taken away from the cemetery grounds, convinced that their absence would result in spiritual chaos and suffering for the souls they believed they had been protecting. The psychological therapy process was particularly challenging because the children's entire sense of identity and purpose had been built around their role as guardians of the dead. Learning to see themselves as individuals with their own rights and futures required fundamental reconstruction of their self-concept and worldview. Many struggled with feelings of guilt and responsibility for the imagined suffering they believed they were causing by abandoning their posts. The investigation expanded to examine the broader network of religious extremists who had supported or encouraged the Bexley family's beliefs. Correspondence found in the family's home revealed connections to various death-obsessed cults and individuals who shared similar beliefs about children's spiritual roles and the need to separate them from modern society. Several other investigations were launched based on these connections, though none revealed operations as extensive as the cemetery chamber. The community of Millbrook was devastated by the revelation that such horrors had been occurring beneath one of their most sacred spaces. The knowledge that they had been visiting graves and attending funeral services while children suffered in darkness just feet below created a profound sense of violation and guilt. Many residents reported feeling that the cemetery had been permanently tainted by the Bexleys' crimes. The cemetery itself underwent extensive renovation and rededication after the investigation was completed. The underground chamber was permanently sealed and a memorial garden was created at the site to honor the children who had been imprisoned there. The memorial features 6 flowering trees planted in a circle around a small fountain, with plaques explaining the site's history and dedication to the survivors. 3 of the rescued children were eventually reunited with family members who had been searching for them for years, though these reunions were complicated by the children's profound psychological changes and their difficulty adapting to normal family relationships. The other 3 children were placed with specialized foster families, trained in dealing with extreme cases of religious trauma and long-term captivity. Hope, the oldest survivor, eventually became a powerful advocate for children affected by religious extremism and cemetery-related crimes. Her journey from a terrified guardian of the dead to an articulate spokesperson for survivors' rights demonstrated the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to overcome even the most systematic attempts at psychological control. The case prompted significant reforms in cemetery management and oversight, with new protocols established for monitoring caretakers and investigating reports of unusual activities on cemetery grounds. The investigation also led to improved cooperation between religious organizations and child protective services to identify and prevent similar cases of religious extremism involving children. The Bexley case became a crucial example for law enforcement and social workers training to recognize signs of religious-based child abuse and the particular challenges involved in investigating crimes committed on sacred or protected grounds. The courage of the 6 survivors in adapting to normal life and sharing their experiences helped educate professionals about the long-term effects of cemetery-based imprisonment and spiritual manipulation. The memorial garden created at the former site of the underground chamber has become a place of healing for both the survivors and the broader community. The inscription on the memorial reads, "For those who lived in darkness beneath the watchful dead, and found the courage to step into the light of the living world. The garden serves as a reminder that even the most sacred spaces can be corrupted by evil, but that truth and justice can ultimately prevail even when buried beneath the earth. The 6 survivors' recovery became a testament to human resilience and the power of proper care and support to overcome even the most extreme trauma. Their transformation from prisoners beneath the dead to individuals embracing life demonstrated that no amount of psychological manipulation can permanently destroy the human capacity for growth, healing, and hope. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,